everybody, we're going to try our first pre-recorded video, see how this goes. So we are going to look at finding the midpoint of a line. So let's define that first. Now, I don't want to overly complicate things. The midpoint really is just the middle, so feel free to just think of it as the middle of a line segment. We can't find the middle of a line because it goes on forever in both directions, but we can for a line segment. Now, the official definition here, it is the point on a segment that is the same distance from both endpoints. So we'll draw a little diagram here. When you're ready, if you could go ahead and draw segment AB, put two little points on the end. And right now I'm just going to eyeball the middle. If you were trying to make a more accurate drawing, you could actually use your ruler, straight edge, draw a nice neat segment and measure to locate the middle. I'm going to call that point X. Now that drawing as it stands is not good enough to show that that's the midpoint. So you've got to do one of two things. Option one, you could do something like, oh, this is 2 centimeters and this is 2 centimeters. So that shows that X is the same distance from A and from B. So that would fit the definition of a midpoint. You can also do this, and this is a marking technique that we will use all year long, is put these little what we call tick marks through those segments. Okay, that is our kind of shorthand way of marking segments congruent to one another. So again, we call those tick marks. All right, so now it's okay to say that X is the midpoint of AB. And let's get used to our new notation here. So it's the midpoint of segment AB. AB next to each other with a little dash on top. We could also say that we have two smaller congruent segments now. AX, segment AX, is congruent to, here's our new congruent symbol we learned about, segment BX or XB. You can call it either one. It's referring to the same segment. Okay. You just need to make sure you have one of these markings in place. Now, what we'll be doing today in this video is actually locating the midpoint on a coordinate plane. All right, so we're going to have this kind of complicated sounding property that we're going to write out, but please just bear with me. We're going to write it out and then I'll kind of clarify what's actually going on here. So here's what the coordinate midpoint property says. If the endpoints of a segment are given by these two coordinates. Now watch how I'm writing this, and I'm talking about coordinates, so like x comma y coordinates, but I'm going to call the first one x1 comma y1, so that's point 1, and same thing, but we'll call this point 2, so x2 comma y2. So they're saying if that is where your two endpoints are located. Now those will be actual just numbers at some point. So when we get into an example here, those will be numbers that we'll throw in there. If those are the endpoints of the segment, then the midpoint is, and here's the big messy coordinate of the midpoint. So write this down, big parentheses here, x1 plus x2. All of that divided by 2. Big messy fraction. Now eventually this will just be a single number, comma, same thing with our y. So we're going to add them together. We're going to divide by 2. Okay, so if they're giving you that here's where my endpoints are, x1, y1, point 1, and point 2, here's how I would calculate the location of the midpoint. Now, if you think about what's really going on here, I took, for the x-coordinate, my two initial x-coordinates, I added them up and I divided by 2. Right? So I'm adding two numbers, I'm dividing by 2. I want you to think on your own for a second. Does that sound familiar? Does that process sound familiar? Add up some numbers, divide by how many there are. This is really just finding the average point or the mean point, right? If you had 5 numbers and I said, find the average of those 5 numbers, you would add them up and you would divide by 5. So that's really what we're doing, and I think that kind of makes sense visually if you think about it too. If you had two endpoints and you were trying to find the middle, that would probably be a good, like, I don't really know how to do this, but I'll just find the middle. You literally just take the average of them. So feel free to think of it as the average point, because that will also help you calculate its coordinates as well. So let's try an example here. Segment AB has endpoints -8, 5, and 3, -6. Find the coordinates of the midpoint of segment AB. Now you'll notice how this is written. Notice it doesn't have the dash on top of the letters. That is only okay because it says the word segment before it. Okay, this is actually a little bit redundant now having that there. I'm going to get rid of that. Just a little note. Okay, so I'm actually going to, first let's think about this on a coordinate plane, because that's really what we're working with here. So I'm going to plot this point, -8, 5. My goodness, if I can see this, it is teeny tiny. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think it's right here. We'll see. Oh boy, oh boy. Let me try that one more time. Oh, that is hard to get right on that spot. Okay, oh, that's not bad. Okay, so we'll call that point A. And then point B is at 3, -6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think right here. We're close enough. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think we got it in the right spot. So what we're talking about is that segment. It's just not too large here. So going from A to B. We want to know where is the middle located. And you can kind of eyeball it for now. You can kind of see roughly where that middle is. We're somewhere around here, but it's a little hard to tell the actual coordinates. So that's where that little formula comes into play. Now, one option for you, and especially while you're getting used to using this, if you're having trouble with just like, oh, just take an average, if it doesn't sound that easy to you, this is a good thought for any formulas that we use in here. I'm going to label what I have so far. So that first point, that's the x1, y1 we were talking about. That second point, that's x2, y2. If you're doing that, you're literally just going to plug these numbers in where they belong in this formula. Okay? If you want to think about it that way, go for it. Just plug in one number at a time, ready, go, simplify, and you're done. Option 2, I really just want to think about, like, what is that formula actually telling me to do? So this first part here says take your x's, add them together. So that is -8 plus 3. I'm going to write it out like this first. If you want to make that -5 right away, by all means, go for it. Do not forget to divide by 2. And also make sure you don't divide by 2 twice. I see that happen a lot. All right, the second one says take your y's, add them up, and divide by 2. So that's 5 and -6. I'm going to write it out like this first. 5 plus -6 divided by 2. Now, technically that's my answer, but that certainly doesn't really tell me where this is located. So we just need to simplify that. -8 plus 3 is -5. Keep that divided by 2 there. 5 plus -6 is -1. Now, that's actually just fine as an answer. If you could reduce this, you should. Okay, so reduce if possible. This one can't be reduced any further. So that's fine as an answer. If you prefer the decimal answer there, as long as it's exact, feel free to write it like this. If it was like 2.3 repeating, we wouldn't want to just put 2.3. That's just not close enough. But this is fine because that's exactly -2.5 and exactly -0.5. Okay, so let's look at where that is. 1, 2.5. Oh, here we are right here. -2.5, -0.5. We'll call that M for midpoint. Okay, so let me kind of just back up. If we think of this as the average point, we're just taking the average of the x's. So we were at -8 and we were at 3. Halfway in between there is -2.5. Same thing, the average of our y's. So we were up here at 3 and down here at -6. If we take the average of those, that's -0.5. So we really are just finding the average point. Okay, I'm going to ask you to join me back in class. We'll go through a couple more examples together.